Chapter 758. It took the centaur and the others more than an hour to cover the distance of 140 kilometers, and part of the time was spent waiting for the probe ball to pass through the underground river. As Fat Dragon said, he found a relay mutant courier for the probe ball in time. The underwater propulsion system that Garnard boasted about was also not bad, and it overcame the complicated waterway environment in the second half of the journey. Coupled with the integrated multi-wave detection module and the landmark provided by Huadian, the underground river and the underlying structure of the more than 10 square kilometers of water in front of them became clear bit by bit in the corresponding projection area on the cross-country road. There were also the gray and white lines that were constantly smearing, still firmly supporting the assertion of non-transcendent power effect. Of course, with the expansion of the detection range, some dark red spots were inevitably dyed in the gray and white colors. Huadian sighed. The number of mutants in the surroundings has increased significantly. This lake is not large, but a relatively stable mutant ecosphere has formed around it. It's not peaceful at all. The centaur was very calm. This is normal. Those small spots are small. As long as we can find the corresponding point and confirm that they are not man-made. As he spoke, he looked at Fat Dragon. The latter shook his head slightly, indicating that he did not find anything special. The centaur clapped again. So far, there is still no large-scale, continuous and effective effect of extraordinary power. It can basically be determined that there is no possibility of human interference in the whole thing. Then let's ignore those things and focus on searching for the source of this abnormal effect, which is under the lake and around it. Garnard shrugged. The pollution here is quite serious. Looking at the history of the three wars, there was a nuclear bomb exploding in the air nearby. God knows why those people went to the plateau to wash the land with a nuclear bomb. Everyone turned to look at the lake. At this time, the center of the lake was boiling due to the high temperature, and the edge showed a slightly green color. Overall, it was quite clear. They could even see the shadows of fish swimming. It was full of vitality, and there were no signs of serious radiation pollution at all. Fat Dragon hooked his finger and the surface of the water near the shore exploded. A half-meter big fish that was swimming underwater jumped out of the water. It had ferocious bone spikes, and there were dense parasites twisting in its lower abdomen. The terrible visual effect made Maho curse. Faster see. Huadian also scratched his head. The mutant species is very rich and the number of high-threat species is unknown. The most troublesome part is the complicated terrain at the bottom of the lake. The center of the lake is affected by the turbulence of the magma chamber and is very unstable. If we go there directly, we might be cooked by the lava and steam that are nearly 1,000 degrees hot. There's no problem with the probe ball. Just leave it there. This isn't considered an extreme environment. Gardner took charge of everything. However, we'll need manpower to scout the surrounding areas. It's not a big deal to drink a few mouthfuls of dirty water. The main thing is whether you are willing to invest the time and energy. The centaur looked around and saw that the other 6 people had no objections, so he clapped his hands. If there are no objections, things are simple. Let's split into an area and search separately. Not only under the water but also around the lake. Let's take turns and share information. As the centaur said, with a goal, the division of labor was not a problem. The dangers on land and underwater were about the same. Even if a powerful B rank couldn't resist the radiation damage, they could quickly remove the negative effects with the help of professional equipment. This was a part of exploring the wilderness, so there was nothing to fuss about. Gardner and the centaur were the first to enter the water. After changing their equipment, the former came over and greeted the centaur. You're not particularly annoying when it comes to doing things. We're the same. I hope we can keep this up. The centaur and Gardner bumped fists. They looked like they appreciated each other's talents. Yin Lu, who was 3,000 kilometers away, continued to observe for over an hour. She couldn't help but be a bit worried when she saw this scene. Sir, the centaur's role-playing is very brilliant. At the very least, he has brought these people together in action. Is the method you arranged for nearby? The activation time. Luonen didn't respond all this time. Yin Lu closed her eyes and most of her perception was replaced. She couldn't sense her surroundings in time. She was a bit flustered for a moment and subconsciously opened her eyes. The colors of reality and illusion interweaved. Both were slightly shaken and it took a while for them to separate and stabilize. Only now did Yin Lu clearly see Luonan's movements. She didn't know when the young Sir had brought up the psychic map in the virtual work area. His finger traced the clouds and the sea tornado, occasionally smearing. Looking at his focused appearance, it seemed that he had already thrown the matter 3,000 kilometers away to the back of his mind. Yinlu couldn't help but remind him, "Sir, they've almost found the source." "Oh, got it. Just keep an eye on him." "Then, sir, regarding the overall situation, some elements need to be added or subtracted at any time. The centaur and fat dragon represent the Amaterasu order. Since they're jumping around like this, I'm considering whether or not to add them in." Yinlu unconsciously held her breath. She couldn't hold her voice and cried out involuntarily, "Pull them in? We're in Ban City." The Amaterasu order was one of the 3 great secret orders of the inner world. Their pope and true god were publicly recognized as the 2 apex extraordinary powers. Although the top 5 true gods of the world were nowhere to be seen all year round, the pope resided in the Amaterasu Pure Land in the seas outside of Ban City. It was already stressful enough to move around under the eyes of the other. Could they not take the initiative to provoke them and make it sound so easy? Luonan understood Yin Li's thoughts very well. "Yeah, it's best if we don't have a powerful enemy. Therefore I've done my best to reduce my presence in the wasteland. From the looks of it, the results are okay. But it's not appropriate to completely stay out of it. I need to construct a suitable environment. I need to cut a slice in that small area and study the wind outside. See the big from the small. That's right. I've drawn a circle here. These people can't see it, but I need to test whether or not the masters behind them can see it and how much they can see. It's not just the Amaterasu order. There's also the Order of Justice, the Military Quantum Corporation and others. I need to take a look." Chapter 759. Take a glance. Is it? Yinlu didn't understand half of Luonan's calculations, but she finally understood what lay behind Luonan's series of actions. It was an ambition and boldness that exceeded her imagination, as well as the corresponding enormous risk. Frankly speaking, this made her tremble with fear. It was the kind of instinctive fear and reverence that came from the bottom of life, that came from being in the shadow of a towering mountain. Fear of danger, and sigh. But soon Yinlu came to a realization. She shouldn't touch the level that was clearly higher than her future upper limit. Rather than being unbearably fearful because of the high and dangerous wind and snow, she might as well attach herself to the lush meadow at the foot of the mountain. She would know the yin and yang, and she would flatter the clear rain. Besides, did she have any other choice? Yinlu, who had lived under Lady Halder's shadow for many years, was very good at clarifying her own position. She was able to quickly adjust her mental state based on this foundation. She immediately shifted the focus of her attention to a domain that she could understand and accept. If we want to attract attention in the wasteland, it shouldn't be enough to just rely on the door of the laboratory, right? After all, that's part of the plan. The situation can be considered good. So there must be conflict. But the centaur's acting is pretty good right now, and this group of people are all drama queens. They're using a script of peaceful inspection. This analogy isn't bad. Luonan praised. He finally raised his head to look at her. You're right. It's impossible to count on them to make a mistake on the stage. Then we can only look backstage. Backstage? Yinlu analyzed the meaning of the word. All sorts of conjectures appeared in her mind for a time, but none of them were complete and clear. And right now, in the wasteland over 3,000 kilometers away, the centaur and the others didn't have any thoughts of stage or backstage. They energetically searched the bottom of the lake and the shore. Their enthusiasm was in full swing. It looked as if victory was close at hand. In reality, no one knew how long this process of approaching victory would last. The saltwater lake they were searching was in a rather serious state of pollution. The residual radiation would more or less affect the operation of the instruments. And the complex and rich mutant species in the water represented large and small conflicts. Even though the 7 searchers were all B-rank powerhouses with superhuman physiques, they still consumed a large amount of time and energy to submerge and resurface a few times. The only good news was that they were continuously narrowing down the area of influence. By noon, they had basically limited the area of influence of the abnormal power to 3 square kilometers around the magma chamber below the rock stratum at the bottom of the lake. However, if the depth and thickness of the water and rock strata were calculated, the remaining work was still a huge one. Xianxia had just come ashore after his previous shift. His clothes hadn't dried yet, so he couldn't help but grumble over the internal comms. From the looks of it, the chances of the underwater teleportation portal I hope for are getting smaller. If I had known that brain demon was so unreliable, I would have asked him for the password to the safe before he joined the operation. Now it was Ma Hou and Jingxin's turn to search on the shore. The former had yet to completely crawl out of the shadow of his defeat to the black fog. He temporarily lost the mood to joke and directly suggested, "Get Gardner to contact his superiors and have them airlift the equipment over. We'll directly crack open the rock stratum at the bottom of the lake." Now, they could basically confirm that this guy was a spy from the military, right? Damn it, he doesn't even bother to hide it. Under the water, the centaur simply replied, "The military thinks it's the smell of rust." Jingxin analyzed a step further. Maybe it's Team AB. Maybe it's directly under the Star Alliance. Given their size, they won't be interested in monopolizing the laboratory. No matter who gets it, they'll have to invite them to join in. Ma Hou found it strange. Then why are they taking off their pants to fart? All they need to do is wait for the various families to offer up their offerings. Because their internal relationships are more chaotic than those outside. God knows who will eat the offerings in the end. It's good to weigh it ahead of time. It's because it's weighing that they can't do it with great fanfare. Jingxin was truly slacking off. He had nothing better to do, so he chatted with Ma Hou. He casually evaluated the other participants. That guy Tui Qinghe is just a tool to act as the eyes of others. Li Taixing and the upper echelons of the Order of Justice behind him are the ones who should be the most vigilant. The Order of Justice has been preaching about the Gate of Truth for many years. There's nothing wrong with forcefully relying on the plane. They won't hold back just because they lost a secret word's first ablatum. This is the case in Xia City, let alone in these wastelands. Deep down, Jingxin was still rather fearful of his peers. He simply ignored the others. Hua Dian might be a mercenary from some financial group. It's impossible for him to go all out. Saint Anthony, on the other hand, hasn't come yet. There's not much to talk about when it comes to the ideals of the order. If there's a conflict, we'll just fight. There's also that Dean Welfare. I can't figure him out for now, but he feels like a backpacker who's wandering the wastelands. It can't be a coincidence, right? Jingxin's nagging flooded the intranet. The others were silent for a time. Jingxin responded to this in a good way. He instantly changed the topic. "Hey Horn Demon. Old pal. Don't you want to release more information about the laboratory? At the very least, its overall structure needs to be described more clearly. Otherwise, we might not even recognize it and miss it." Several seconds passed before Horn Demon replied, "There's no need for me to repeat it over and over again. Besides, I have no way of accurately describing it. As I said before, it was a labyrinth. Luo Yuandao's laboratory is placed at the entrance of the maze, but it will occasionally venture deep into the maze due to complicated factors. At that time, the laboratory will be like a hanging basket by the side of a well. It will prevent you from falling into a bottomless hole." Oh, it's just a description. Horned Demon was helpless against Jingxin's boredom. "Let me make another suggestion. Rigorous researchers and careful explorers will be safer there. However, the greatest harvest still belongs to the lucky fellows. The last lucky person was Luo Yuan. I hope I can be the next one." Jingxin chuckled. In the various wilderness laboratories, there's a publicly acknowledged law. All luck is accumulated on accidents, corpses. How many people are you planning on letting die for you? I don't know either, so all of you be careful. Out of professional ethics, I will try my best to push your priorities to the back. As for the other participants, I hope that we can reach a consensus." "What do you mean by consensus?" "Physical bodies first. Those with no one behind them first. Of course, if I were to line up, I would kick that bastard Gardner in first. It's not only because he has a physical body but also because he has a disgusting mouth." At this moment, Jingxin and Monkey laughed strangely, but they were also vigilant. It was probably because they had renewed their understanding of Horned Demon's powerful grudge. It was also at this moment that Fat Dragon's thought interjected. This powerhouse, who always maintained his calm or stiff state, reminded them in a timely manner, "It's time to change shifts. Also cut the crap. It's too wasteful." "Yes, Captain. I'll follow your orders." He had no choice but to listen. This internal communication network was built based on Fat Dragon's mental network. To him, Every single word of the conversation that flooded the screen was an extra burden. Although the burden was as light as nothing. Horned Demon began to turn around. In fact, he didn't like the environment at the bottom of the lake. Even if he risked radiation damage and took a mouthful of lake water, he would get a terrible chaotic outcome. This was not a good sign for a psychic. Perhaps he should try taking something more substantial from the bottom of the lake. Once he thought of it, Horned Demon spun in the water and dug up some silt and aquatic plants. As he floated up, he stuffed the greenish-black filth into his mouth. It seems to contain the heat of the magma chamber. That's the smell of the end point. But it's too dry. It's not particularly good to point up. Horned Demon tasted thought and raised his head again. The light of the shallow water spread above his head. Monkey reported at this moment. Cui Qinghe has floated up. I'm preparing to enter the water. Jingxin also said, I'll pick up Gardener. Who knows where that foul-mouthed scum is? I see him. Horned Demon glanced to the side and saw Gardener, who had sunk to the bottom of the lake, float up. The distance between the two sides gradually closed and Gardener gave him a thumbs up. Large bubbles emerged from his mouth as if he was saying something. The corner of Horned Demon's mouth twitched and he returned the same gesture. After a friendly greeting, the distance between the two was even closer. Gardener was indeed a powerhouse with a physical body. He was the first to emerge from the water, leaning on the shore with one elbow, and he didn't forget to reach out to pull Horned Demon. Horned Demon secretly rolled his eyes and reached out his hand. At this moment, Monkey complained, By the way, Fatty Dragon, don't be too focused. Allocate some energy to the communication network. There's a difference in the quality of calls on the shore and in the water. There's an echo noise or something. A blank space suddenly appeared on the communication network. This blank was poisonous and it was rapidly spreading. As a result, the taste of the silt and aquatic plants in Horned Demon's mouth became extremely bitter, with a heart-palpitating almond taste. Poison. It wasn't the ingredients in his mouth, but the vicious stare of the goddess of destiny. Horned Demon abruptly withdrew his hand, but in terms of physical reaction, there was definitely a qualitative difference between him and Gardener, who came from the military. He didn't completely dodge and the fingertips of his index and middle fingers were viciously pinched. His bones and flesh were instantly twisted and deformed. Before the pain could be transmitted back, his body was pulled up. At this moment, his right hand was almost crippled. In front of him, Gardener pushed the shore, leaned back, and slammed his heavy elbow into the connection between Horned Demon's chest and abdomen. Gastric juices, blood bubbles, and of course, the silt and aquatic plants in his mouth were instantly crushed into an indescribable dark color, spurting out from Horned Demon's mouth and nostrils. At the same time, he heard Gardener's sinister laughter. Chapter 760. Compared to the near-fatal elbow strike, Gardener's ferocious voice shook the Horned Demon's mind even more. But at the same time he heard the horse monkey's muffled groan, which then elongated into a painful scream. The scream was filled with danger and it suddenly pulled the Horned Demon out of his trance. He didn't have the time to think about something more complicated. He chased after the sound of the horse monkey's scream, opened his mouth wide and screamed. His face, body, and even the surrounding water waves were violently distorted. The resulting impact and the psychic piercing damage hidden deep within fused into one, and it was effectively concentrated as it blasted straight at Gardener. At the same time, an illusion was also released. It wasn't exquisite, but it was just right, turning the surrounding turbulent waters into a distorted, broken, and blurry mirror image in the blink of an eye. And before all of this happened, the Horned Demon had already silently twisted off the index and middle fingers of his right hand that Gardener had firmly clamped down on. His flesh and bones were completely severed, and he also used the chaos created by the water and sound waves to fly backward. Due to the pain from the elbow strike, the centaur instinctively bent over, and his entire body arched like a prawn. Although Gardener was blocked by his escape method and his body stagnated, he still quickly extended his arm and swung it. His fingertips brushed past the centaur's forehead, cutting through the skin and flesh, scraping the skull and almost lifting up the top of his skull. The Horned Demon gritted his teeth, enduring the pain and dizziness, and his retreating figure suddenly deviated. It was only at this moment that Jingxin and Fatty Dragon, who were on the shore and underwater, truly reacted. The latter's reaction was even more direct. In this turbulent waters, all the fish, waterfowl and other flesh and blood lifeforms exploded in an instant, forming bloody fragments that were like grenade fragments that covered a vast space with a radius of 30 meters in the blink of an eye. And the flesh and blood bombs that contained curses and wizard powers simultaneously detonated the turbulent storm in the abyss, absorbing tremendous destructive power and sweeping through everything indiscriminately. In fact, the horned demon Zhou Xian and the horse monkey had all received the blessings from the propping mulberry tree's branches, leaves and roots at that moment, shielding them from the blood curse's damage to the greatest extent. On the other hand, Gardener and Xianxia, who had also attacked the horse monkey, had to turn back and dive deeper into the water to temporarily avoid the brunt. Even so, they were unable to completely dodge it and suffered injuries of varying degrees. Due to Fat Dragon's control of the situation, this sudden and absurd encounter finally had a rare opening. The centaur had a chance to catch his breath. Instead of retreating to the deep waters, he took the opportunity to turn to the shore, just in time to brush past the deadly gardener and meet up with Zhou Xian, who had rushed over to provide support. He was saved for the time being. But at this moment, the root network of the propping mulberry tree was extremely blank. On the shore not far from the centaur, Maho's body was half in the water and half on the shore. He seemed to want to climb ashore, but his movements were stiff. His throat issued a ho-ho sound. He stretched his hand forward, but his body leaned back. By the time Zhou Xian rushed over from the horned demon's side and reached out to grab it, horse monkey had already collapsed backward. It plunged heavily into the green water and began its final convulsions. His throat had been cut in half, and the wound on his chest had penetrated all the way to his internal organs, but not a single drop of blood had gushed out. The Order of Justice's life-changing blade. Zhou Xian's face was gloomy. His words were like an obituary. For a B-rank ability user, knife wounds to the throat and heart might not necessarily be fatal, especially with the augmentation of the propping mulberry tree. However, with the scales of truth as its cornerstone, the law of judgment, which robbed vitality and vitality, erased all flukes and took away the life of the horse monkey. When the two systems of orders collided, the scales of truth had the upper hand at the end of the minuscule clash. The centaur opened his eyes wide. Blood flowed down his forehead, seeping into his eye sockets. He could endure such discomfort, but he could not accept this absurd situation at all. What the hell is this? The howls of the centaur had been selected by Luo Nan, and they were faithfully restored in Yin Li's perception. Of course, this also included the series of strange and unforeseen events that puzzled the centaur. Therefore Yin Lu was much stronger than the centaur. At the very least, she could clearly understand the basic sequence of events. However, there was one crucial link. She clearly knew that it was like that, but she could not understand why it was like that. For this reason, she could not help but cast a seeking gaze at Luo Nan. Mr. Her voice was suddenly cut off. This was because Yin Lu saw Luo Nan, who was completely focused. He was staring intently at the virtual work area. His eyes did not even blink. Aside from the psychic storm diagram, there was also a configuration blueprint drawn with the terrain of the wasteland 3,000 kilometers away within the dim light of the projection area. The traces of alterations on the psychic diagram revealed a different color. And on the configuration blueprint, there was a region that flickered with light. Looking at the topographic map, it was the area of the saltwater lake where the conflict had erupted. Luo Nan seemed to have heard Yin Li's low cry at this time. His lower jaw, resting on the back of his palm, rose and fell slightly. His lips were like the cry of an ant as he muttered, "It's all working, but it's still not enough. It's not over yet." Yin Li's consciousness switched to the scene of the wasteland. By the side of the saltwater lake, ripples caused by the battle were spreading towards the center of the lake. There was still a distance from the boiling white waves. There was a muffled rumble in the relatively calm waters, and a water pillar nearly 10 meters tall exploded. At the same time, a human figure appeared from the explosion. Xianxia. This ruthless swordsman who had just killed Horse Monkey, was thrown out of the water by the shockwave from the underwater explosion. Crap. Fatty Dragon. Xianxia immediately came to a realization. He could not help but feel regret. Since Zhou Xian was on the shore after killing Horse Monkey, Xianxia chose to retreat from the lake in order to save time for his breakthrough. This was also because Fatty Dragon's control spell covered the area indiscriminately. Luo Nan mistakenly believed that his most powerful enemy was already close to the shore. He never expected that this simple-minded blockhead would be waiting for him near the center of the lake. Fatty Dragon's communication network had a problem, but there was no problem at all with his own strength. Cui Qinghe took a deep breath and his slender figure descended. The soles of his feet touched the surface of the water, but he did not sink. He was like an enormous dragonfly, stepping on the surface of the lake as if he was treading on flat ground. He was lithe and quick. This was the best technique for escaping and preserving one's life. The problem was that the water column that exploded beside Cui Qinghe, in addition to the shocking impact, every living being in it had a round of flesh and blood explosion. Under the enhancement of the spell, they formed tangible and intangible sharp thorns that shot towards him in a concentrated manner. After all, Cui Qinghe was not a real dragonfly, nor did he have the ability to fly like a bird. It was impossible for him to completely dodge them. At this moment he could no longer care about anything else. He silently called out to Priestess to help me. Relying on the subtle yet tenacious connection between him and Li Taixing, which was also built on the Scales of Truth system, he silently chanted an incantation and instantly transformed the vitality that he had just seized from the horse monkey into a life-saving defensive barrier. He also specially strengthened the special trait of curse interference. This was already the most reliable plan that Cui Qinghe could come up with in a short period of time. However, just as the parish's powers were augmented and the Scales of Truth's sacred space took form, he heard a rustling sound that resembled a tree trunk's leaves swaying. At that instant, the area where Cui Qinghe was located seemed to have moved from the surface of a surging lake to the depths of a lush forest. Through the gaps between the leaves, there was bright sunlight shining down. It was as hot as fire and as sharp as a sword. The incantation's interference barrier that Cui Qinghe had constructed melted like snow under this round of sunlight. As for his relatively stable will, it instantly wavered. Chapter 761. The conflict between them had already reached such a level? The Order of Amaterasu wanted to start an all-out war with the Order of Justice? Cui Qinghe's mind was filled with distracting thoughts, but no matter how frightened he was, sunlight seeped through the gaps between the branches and leaves. It was like thousands of sharp swords, piercing and slicing him from head to toe. It was impossible to dodge. It was only at this moment that the Order of Justice, which was constructed on top of the Scales of Truth, suddenly realized what was going on. It attempted to quickly rise to a higher level, but it was already too late. Cui Qinghe's physical injuries weren't actually that serious, but it was as if a nuclear bomb had been forcefully shoved into his mind. The scorching high-energy forcefully separated his soul from his physical body, roasted and melted, even quickly evaporating. During this process, the distinct fragments of Cui Qinghe's memories were also forcefully extracted, turning into intermittent spiritual waves that were rapidly transcribed, analyzed, and plunged into nothingness. On the shore, the horned demon was also struck by the astonishing changes that came from the center of the lake. It was to the extent that the bleeding wound on his severed finger was pressed into the mud. He was completely unaware of the pain and could only turn his head in shock. In reality, he could not see anything with his eyes, but his mind had already been submerged by the lingering spiritual light from the center of the lake. In a daze he could only vaguely see a majestic divine tree that supported the heavens and the earth. The trunk was split into two, seemingly separated yet also joined. The branches and leaves were tall and lush, and a brilliant sun passed through them. It also vaguely resembled a divine bird draped in multicolored light, coiling and ascending. Such a beautiful scene pressed down on the void. It was hard to tell what was real and what was fake. However, the enormous pressure that reached the depths of his heart was real, making it hard for him to breathe. What a joke. At this moment, the horned demon had the same thoughts as the dead Cui Qinghe. No matter how one looked at it, this kind of great divine treasure-level power belonged to those at the very top of the Order of Amaterasu. No, just look at Fat Dragon who had just appeared on the surface of the lake. Based on that respectful and reverent reaction, that expression and posture, it could completely eliminate the inaccurate limitation of those at the very least. At the very least, it should be one of the two. Yes, considering the personalities of those two legendary powerhouses. Before the horned demon could come to a final conclusion, the roots and branches of the Fusang divine tree system naturally began to throb. That majestic divine tree lay across the spiritual plane. 10 suns rotated and its light shone brightly. Wherever the light shone, even the turbulent storms of the abyss trembled. The horned demon felt that it was like an ugly and mystical giant casting its furious gaze down. It did not hide at all and was even venting wantonly. After another miserable shriek, Gardner, who had dived to the bottom of the lake and escaped, exploded out of the lake like a cooked shrimp. Very soon he fell back into the water. It was unknown whether he was dead or alive. On the other side of the lake there was another figure. He had already run almost 5 kilometers away, but he was also grabbed by the invisible hand. He struggled while flailing his arms and legs, but he was Hua Dian, who had been staying out of the matter and whose whereabouts were unknown. Hey. Although it was said that the Lord True God was an impulsive person that was rarely seen among extraordinaries, wasn't he a little too impulsive in this situation? Being connected to the Amaterasu cult, the centaur demon was inevitably affected. He had clearly become a slightly thicker tip in the roots of the towering divine tree. Powerful energy spread outward through him and a large amount of information was collected through him. Obviously, the impulsive demon was particularly concerned about the matter at the saltwater lake. Was it because the church system he established was hacked? The centaur was not a fool. When things came to this point, he could also understand from Gardner and Chuiqing his counterattack. There was a problem with their internal communication network. Otherwise, how could Gardner accurately combine those 3 malicious keywords and send them back? However, no one had expected that the reaction of the impulsive true god would be so strong that it was beyond imagination. Before the horned demon could finish his thoughts, the impulsive demon behind the distant deep space did something even more outrageous. The sound of water suddenly stopped. The surging lake surface was suddenly suppressed by an invisible force. It was a real suppression. Whether it was the gentle waves on the shore or the boiling water in the middle of the lake that was evaporated by the heat of the lava, everything froze in an instant. The sun was shining, but it seemed like the entire lake surface was frozen. Or perhaps, it was time and space that was frozen. A buzzing sound rang out. It descended from the mental plane and crushed into the material world. The horned demon's mind shook, and his entire consciousness went blank for a long time. Oh no! Inla cried out involuntarily. The image she received suddenly distorted and turbulent, showing how difficult it was for Luonan to receive the information. What truly bombarded her mind was the faintly discernible shadow of the towering tree in the turbulent image. She was in Ban City and she was a member of the secret order. Of course she knew what kind of danger it represented. The majesty of the Fusang divine tree manifested itself. At the very least, one of the 2 extraordinaries, the Pope and the True God, had personally made a move. Inla did not dare to continue watching. She also did not want Luonan to be distracted and sift through the images and information for her. That was the Fusang divine tree manifesting itself. With Fatty Dragon, a high-level member of the order, the Fusang divine tree could display 50 to 60% of its power. 50 to 60% was also the power of an extraordinary. The problem was that since Luonan was showing it to her, it was not easy for Inlu to refuse. She had the heart to refuse, but she was worried that she would distract Luonan's attention. She opened her eyes to look, trembling with fear, but she saw that Luonan's posture was still the same. He was still sitting there. His 2 hands were intertwined and lightly propped against his chin. It seemed that his posture had not changed from beginning to end. The rapidly fluctuating rays of light in the virtual work area struck Luonan's face with a blurry color. At first glance, Luonan looked cloudy and clear, but his clear and tranquil eyes seemed to be able to contain and suppress all chaotic elements. It seemed that Luonan felt Inli's gaze. In the next moment, Luonan specifically turned his face to explain to Inlu, "The carrier of the sensing network has been tossed and turned. Right now the visual effect isn't too good. Just bear with it for a bit." Now was not the time for idle chatter. Inlu really did not know what attitude she should use to face him. Right now she could roughly see that rather than bickering with Luonan about the focus of his attention, or trying to distinguish the violently distorted image from a distance, it would be better to look at the 2 drawings in the virtual work area in front of Luonan. This was especially true for the configuration design drawing below. The bright area related to the saltwater lake had all sorts of structural lines flickering with light. At the same time, some of them simply collapsed. Inli's heart endlessly contracted and expanded as the light flickered. Actually, they were already fighting. Indeed, the 2 were fighting far away from here. A distance of over 3,000 kilometers was not an exaggeration to say that it was the ends of the earth. But the problem was that Luo Nan was currently in Ban City. He was in the headquarters of the Amaterasu Order. Even if Ouyang Chun or Her Majesty Empress Wu personally came, they might not be able to easily escape. Relax. The current trend is very good. Luo Nan's fingers covered the corners of his lips, and an inexplicable smile appeared. He narrowed his eyes and softly calculated, 52% were discovered by touching. 21% were directly destroyed. 9% were grasped by the veins of the design. As for cracking, 1%. Chapter 762. On the top deck of the Ray, Luo Nan's posture finally changed as he sat on the bench in the sunlit area. He leaned back, his back touching the cushion. Under the illumination of the gradually slanting sun, a soft feeling started from here and gradually spread to his entire body. Phew! This long breath not only expelled the waste from his body, but it also threw away a small portion of his psychological pressure. There was a moment when Luo Nan even wanted to close his eyes and take a short nap. But in the end he locked his gaze onto the virtual work area. He let the psychic map, which was filled with danger and the unknown, give him new stimulation. Yes, it was still too early to relax. It was still too early. Mr. The current Yinlu already didn't know how to communicate with Luo Nan. Luo Nan stared at the two maps in the work area. He searched back bit by bit from his instantly relaxed state. He found that feeling of tension and danger. During this time he didn't mind chatting with Yinlu. If you go hunting, of course I'm not talking about the recreational type. I'm talking about the survival type. Yinlu couldn't grasp Luo Nan's pulse at all. She could only follow his tone and say, "Yes, I understand. It's like I'm a nomad in the wilderness. I'm going to hunt for rations for tonight and the next few days." Excellent. That's exactly what I meant. Luo Nan really liked Yinlu's understanding of others. This saved him a lot of effort. He continued to talk about the background settings. Right now you have a few knives that aren't particularly sharp, but they can still bleed. You have quite a high level of skill in setting up traps. You've been staring at your prey for a long time. You've prepared for a long time. You know its ins and outs and its movement patterns. You have a high chance of luring it into a trap. And it doesn't know anything about you. But it's an extremely dangerous mutant. It can tear you to pieces as soon as it escapes the trap. Will you make a move under these circumstances? Yinlu didn't speak for a while. Her mind flashed back to the letter that she hadn't sent yet. Some of the deductions and conjectures in the letter were rapidly corroborating with reality. Perhaps she should say, just as I expected. It was just as she expected. Luo Nan was currently planning a hunting operation, and it could already be determined that the target that could cause Luo Nan to be cautious and hesitant right now was certainly a powerful person of the extraordinary rank. Will you make a move? Luo Nan asked again. I will. Yinlu's voice was very soft, but it was extremely bright and resolute. I will make a move. Oh. He's made so many preparations and spent so much time and effort. It's obvious how strong his killing intent is. Therefore it is inevitable that we will make a move. It's just a matter of choosing the right time. Luo Nan nodded slightly. It was interesting to say things this way. He then asked, how would you choose the right time? The most ideal situation is, of course, to think of ways to strengthen the traps and sharpen the blades until there are no mistakes. But since it's a survival hunt, we have to consider physical strength and hunger. Also, we have to avoid bumping into another dangerous target during this period. Yinlu's words were filled with the intention of admonishing him. Her gaze was also on the psychic diagram. Unknowingly, she had some understanding of the meaning behind the diagram. At this moment, when he looked at the three tornadoes that pierced through the sky and the sea, he felt his heart palpitate with fear and unease. Oh, cut the Gordian knot. Sure. Yinlu spoke hurriedly. The words, temporarily detour, were stuck in her throat when she bumped into Luo Nan's sharp and penetrating gaze. She suddenly choked up, lowered her head and opened her mouth again. The meaning behind her words was completely different. If you want to make a move, the blood flame order may not be that sharp, but it can still be used by you. This isn't just my opinion. This is also the madam's opinion. Luo Nan laughed, but he didn't go any deeper into the conversation. He just waved his hand, indicating that the topic was over. His figure straightened once more and he leaned forward slightly. He looked at the configuration design while paying attention to the current situation in the wasteland 3,000 kilometers away. There, the power of the Fusang Divine Tree was wreaking havoc. However, the focus of Luo Nan's attention was clearly diverted. From his perspective, the core of this matter had already evolved from the simple goal of finding his grandfather's laboratory to a complex experimental design. He had designed and constructed a quagmire. His original intention was to place a stink bomb, to torment those bastards who had ideas about the laboratory. However, the quagmire soon became a testing ground and it became a touchstone. The impulsive and action-oriented member of the Amaterasu Order used a coordination ability that far exceeded Luo Nan's expectations. He used the most violent methods to demonstrate to Luo Nan the most likely result of a collision between the apex experts of the inner world and the configuration system. Luo Nan was very happy. As always, the configuration system displayed its powerful and reliable structure to Luo Nan. And this time was clearly different from the examples he had tested back and forth in recent times. It was infinitely close to actual combat. It was the closest to Luo Nan's future practical application. This was an excellent standard of reference. The Fusang Divine Tree had manifested its divine might. The will of the Pope or a true god had descended, but the true body had yet to arrive. Basically, it was equivalent to the out-of-body state of a mental type extraordinary. Yes, there was also the level of strength after the fleshly body suffered heavy injuries. Luo Nan could see that the configuration module in the saltwater lake region was rapidly collapsing, and the speed of the collapse was growing faster and faster. Luo Nan looked at the time. Over 200 seconds had passed since the enemy arrived with monstrous hostility to carry out a destructive search and trace back the hidden veins. Even if he chopped it down in half, he would still have plenty of time. Of course, the situation was different when one attacked from the outside and when one struggled from the inside. At the same time, one had to consider that the venting was destruction. The power that erupted from the struggle for life would be vastly different. There was one more thing. Luo Nan looked at the reactions of the others. It seemed that all of them were focused on the matter of the Fusang Divine Tree's system being blackened. They didn't pay too much attention to whether or not Gardner and Cui Qinghe's intense reactions were appropriate. Did they feel that the changes in people's emotions were unreasonable? But Cui Qinghe's soul had been forcefully stripped away and analyzed in a destructive manner. Did they not discover any problems during this process? Luo Nan himself was a bit shocked. His thoughts penetrated deep into space. Through the channels of the Wraith sign in the polar domain, he peered into the abyssal sun wheel and experienced the state of the Wraith sign itself. Ever since he discovered the source of the Wraith sign's power, the Wraith sign seemed to have unwittingly leaped to another level. It had an even stronger and more secretive effect on the emotions of the human heart. Even extraordinaries were unable to detect the Wraith sign in their urgency. Luo Nan just didn't know what the effect was on extraordinaries themselves. Especially extraordinaries in their spirit-body state. Luo Nan was busy making comparisons and deductions. It didn't matter to him who the powerful person controlling the Fusang Divine Tree system was. In any case, it was just a symbol for reference and comparison. However, the big shot in front of him had repeatedly probed, bombarded, and destroyed. He had even swept through the entire saltwater lake. Yet he still didn't have an acceptable result. His emotions had truly exploded on the spot. He projected his power without regard for the consequences or the cost. Chapter 763. The centaur was probably the unluckiest one. As a psychic, his perception was finer and more sensitive than the other two. There were some information that he couldn't block even if he wanted to. In a trance, he was guided by the power of Fusang Divine Tree. He penetrated the water body, the rock layer, the mud, and the magma chamber. After repeated interference collisions, he even vaguely encountered some strange structures. The centaur could feel that the true god was gradually paying more attention to these strange structures. He kept scanning and analyzing them, but these structures themselves had been integrated into the material structure of the water body and rock layer. There was even a part that seemed to be closer to the changing spacetime itself. The centaur was far from being able to experience the specific spacetime structure. It was only under the influence of the Fusang Divine Tree system that he came into contact with some content beyond the scope. This was barely a good thing. It broadened his horizons and deepened his level. It was also beneficial for his future training. The premise was that he could struggle to survive today's terrible situation. The centaur's pessimistic expectations came from the true god's poor progress and his increasingly restless emotions. From his point of view, the true god's searching and scanning work seemed a little crude. At least compared to the delicate structure that was engraved on the mud, rocks, water, and even the changes of time and space, it was too crude. The physical accuracy of these structures was actually very average. Perhaps they were scratches on the rocks or obvious deep trenches in the mud layer. Many of them were visible to the naked eye. But once it involved the whole, the connection between them became unconstrained and unpredictable. The basic strokes of the meaningful structure might have brushed past the rock, and the next stroke might have connected to the bottom of the silt layer, and the next stroke might have even been a strand of rippling water. It might have seemed like a random drawing and was filled with absurd coincidences, but they were meaningful on a deeper and broader level. At least from the results of the current detection, they were meaningful. The problem was that the true god always brushed past these meaningful structures. He could sense it, but it was often only after he destroyed the carrier of the structure and sensed the special resistance that he suddenly realized it. When he wanted to go back to study, it was already a mess and beyond recognition. It was easier said than done to restore it. Over and over again, not to mention the true god himself, even the centaur from the perspective of half a passerby would explode after following a few times. By the time the saltwater lake was destroyed 7 to 8 times by the true god's powerful power, all traces were completely annihilated. Unless a true god had the ability to turn back time, the only way to find the ultimate mystery was in a dream. It was not easy to admit this fact. At the very least, that was the case for a true god. From the vibrations transmitted by the Fusang divine tree system, that person's emotions had probably exploded for the second time. It carried an intense unwillingness and wanted to make a final struggle. Therefore, he expanded the range of his senses and the coverage area of the Fusang divine tree's power system. With the saltwater lake as the center, his search radius expanded to 10 kilometers, 30 kilometers, 50 kilometers. As the fulcrum of the system, Minotaur and the other two became the relay station for the transmission of spirit waves. A vast power that didn't belong to them rushed through their body and soul structures. The heat was so strong that it could almost melt their cultivation bases. Minotaur was really afraid. Although he was also considered a believer under the Amaterasu Church's wings, his faith was inferior to that of an old fox like Zhou Xian, much less fat dragon. It was completely a combination of benefits. The Amaterasu Church didn't care about this. It wasn't that they were tolerant and magnanimous, but that once the true god who was used to raging impulsively started killing, shallow believers like Minotaur might be eliminated like ants. In the past, Minotaur only treated such rumors as a joke, but now he felt that this danger was approaching. Minotaur turned his gaze with great difficulty and swept it across Zhou Xian. That guy didn't care about the mud beneath him at all. He was already lying on the ground and didn't move at all to show his reverence and the fear of facing the terrible unknown. What the F***ck? Who the hell is this? Since they have such divine powers that can turn invisible, they still use such means to tease us? Or could it be some great enemy of the church who had deliberately lured a true god over to make things difficult for him? No matter how he thought about it, there was always a link in the chain of logic that couldn't be connected. Felt terrible. I can actually use my brain to think about something else. Minotaur sensitively sensed that the pressure of power projected by the Fusang divine tree system had decreased. Is it because the true god's impulsive emotions have begun to fade? At this moment, a rumbling sound came from a certain direction. At first it sounded like thunder, but Minotaur quickly distinguished that it was a low-flying jet. He subconsciously looked up and quickly captured a tiny silhouette passing under the clouds. It's a plane. It should be a medium-sized transport. Why does it look familiar? Why does this look like the one I forcibly hijacked when I flew from Huqing? After 6 hours, the transport plane swaggered back and began to hover over the saltwater lake. Does the pilot of the transport plane have any unusual expectations for Fiery Bird? When the centaur had similar malicious thoughts in his mind, thanks to the Fusang divine tree system, his sharp senses accurately captured that the cabin door of the cargo plane in the sky opened, and a figure jumped out of it. Just like what Minotaur did 6 hours ago, but this time there was no help from the sharp-beaked pterodactyl. The figure didn't wear an umbrella, personal aircraft, or other auxiliary equipment. He just jumped down with his bare hands and fell like a stone. Is he going to dump the body? Before he finished his thoughts, the falling figure had already fallen more than half of the height. He had already reached the airspace only a few hundred meters from the surface of the saltwater lake. Without any reason, the falling momentum suddenly slowed down. The change was so drastic that the Minotaur on the ground was shocked. The fatal acceleration of gravity was almost completely applied to the person, causing his limbs to be greatly distorted and squirmed. The vision of a B-level ability user could already distinguish the figure and facial contours of a person. In the eyes of Minotaur, the guy was wearing an anti-tank suit and the face was vaguely familiar. Yes, it was the co-pilot that Minotaur had seen on the transport plane. But this face only stayed in Minotaur's eyes for a second or two. The facial features formed by the high-speed squirming facial muscles and partial bone deformation had turned into a person he was more familiar with, Luo Yuan. Boom! After a miraculous mid-air buffer, the silhouette resumed its free fall. In the blink of an eye, it smashed heavily onto the surface of the lake near the shore. Splashes of water and mud splattered everywhere, comparable to exploding shrapnel. Chapter 764. A True God. Luo Yuan. On the North Mountain Lake in Ban City, Yinlu finally confirmed the identity of the Amaterasu cult's expert. At the same time, she was shocked by the one who had just landed in the wilderness. For most people in the inner world, Luo Yuan hadn't been in their sights for a long time. What truly left a deep impression was the attempted assassination of Ouyang Qin and Luo Nan in Xia City. That happened exactly half a year ago. Yinlu turned her head to look at Luo Nan's reaction. Sure enough, Luo Nan frowned. What did he come here for? We need to retract the induction network. The already distorted image of the wasteland in front of Yinlu instantly zoomed out and became even more blurry. It felt like he had returned from the panoramic virtual reality to a traditional video. This was undoubtedly Luo Nan's initiative. It showed how much Luo Nan valued and feared this person. Yinlu was unable to pick and choose. She could only follow Luo Nan's gaze and size up Luo Yuan from afar. To be honest, one couldn't see much from a distance. One could only see that this person kept smiling. His smile lines formed clear lines of muscles and showed a serious color. Together they formed a unique emotional tension. However, Luo Nan's gaze quickly shifted away from Luo Yuan. His focus was mostly on Minotaur, Jingxin and Fat Dragon, greatly deviating from the focus of the matter. It could be said to be a mediocre director's technique, making Yinlu, a spectator, rather uncomfortable. While Luo Nan's train of thought was the most difficult to adapt to. This sort of clairvoyance through a traditional lens was the embodiment of Luo Nan's focus and direction of thought. It was truly different from ordinary people. Luckily, Luo Nan didn't forget his responsibility of broadcasting. He explained a bit to Yinlu. I've been monitoring this fellow quite often recently. He's very sensitive, so I need to change my usual methods. Also, I'll do another experiment. By the way, Yinlu would rather not hear this explanation. Compared to the little struggle in Yinlu's heart, the Minotaur who didn't know that he had become someone's focus was really in a dilemma. The one who fell from the sky crashed into the lake and greeted him as if nothing had happened. At the same time, he slowly walked to the shore. As the distance approached, the centaur could clearly hear the sound of bones and muscles twisting and tearing. The damage from falling from a high altitude was real. But amidst this cacophony, there was clearly a rather harmonious sound that represented the traces of controllable power. It was precisely this power that gathered the body of the co-pilot that should have turned into a pile of flesh and blood, temporarily turning him into another person. Fan Lu had mentioned that the two transport pilots were both products of the gene exchange. They were clones created from genes and asexual reproduction. It was also the carrier of Luo Yuan's power. Luo Yuan did not establish a religious system such as the Fusang Divine Tree or the Scales of Truth, but through those products, his power and consciousness could still be projected to every corner of Earth. Seeing this person here and now, Horned Demon felt uneasy. In fact, after Luo Yuan set foot on the shore of the lake, he stared at the centaur for a long time. Not only his sight, but the centaur's super-perception that was enhanced by the Fusang Divine Tree system could also clearly feel that above the chaotic and turbulent abyss area, in the deep polar region that was even harder to detect, there was a deadly cannon that silently adjusted its direction and pointed straight at them. I won't be treated like Ouyang Qin, right? If Luo Nan can do it, then so can I. Pooh. Horned Demon's mind was a bit chaotic. Exploring the polar region, he directly felt that Luo Yuan was the ultimate weapon that intimidated all powers and won the respect of the masses. This was an achievement worthy of commemoration, but it was also an even crueler test. After all, this was the planar crossbow. This was a nickname that came from Xia City, and it was quite famous. It was also under the intimidation of this ultimate weapon that the restless true god temporarily recovered his calm. Fat Dragon, who had experienced a fierce battle in the lake water, slowly walked ashore. His originally stiff pupils radiated a divine light that was as brilliant as the morning sun. Soul possession. Pass. Luo Nan quickly eliminated a certain possibility from the yacht. Yinlu felt quite subtle. Whether it was Luo Nan, Luo Yuan, or True God, all three of them used inconceivable methods to project their own power and consciousness thousands of kilometers away. Their methods of projection were different. No matter which one it was enough to make one feel odd. But in the current situation, why did she feel that Luo Nan was the one who held the upper hand? He maintained a hidden and transcendent state. It was something that True God and Luo Yuan could not discover, and it was hard for them to reach. Yes, you can't compare it like this. Yinlu was a little scared by her own thoughts. She instinctively shook her head. Luo Yuan also found the right target for conversation. He greeted the special existence that was in the form of Fat Dragon, but in reality he was a true god for the second time. Lord True God, your temper is still so irritable. The laboratory isn't that important. Why do you need to get angry? It wasn't because of the matter with the laboratory. Luo Yuan's words were too matter-of-fact. Horn Demon and Jingxing really wanted to correct him. But the true god, who was the most impulsive, didn't express anything. Moreover, the restlessness that pervaded the Fusang divine tree system continued to fall. Perhaps it was because he was afraid of Luo Yuan's planar crossbow, or perhaps he didn't want to let this powerful person of the same level laugh at him. The true god tacitly agreed to this matter. Fat Dragon obeyed his will and spoke in a low voice. What are your plans for coming here? I'm an outsider. I came here because I was entrusted by someone. If I really want to talk about my plans. Some people want to make money without knowing their intentions, but they have shamefully failed. I came here to watch a joke. As he spoke, he hooked his finger at Horn Demon, who was still half submerged in the water. His smile remained unchanged, but it made Horn Demon's heart suddenly twitch. Horn Demon subconsciously looked at Fat Dragon, but the latter didn't express anything. An ominous premonition lingered in his heart, but Horn Demon couldn't refuse. He didn't even have the confidence to put on his usual crazy appearance. He could only take a deep breath, slowly climb ashore and drag his way over. The distance between the two wasn't long, so they quickly approached each other. It's worth the ticket to watch you make a fool of yourself. I shouldn't be fussing with you. However, your employer is very dissatisfied with your stupid appearance, and Toyama Auction House has been pressuring you. Speaking of which, you should know what the stupidest thing is, right? Luo Yuan's tone was relaxed without any feeling of reprimand. The corners of Horn Demon's eyes twitched slightly, and the bad feeling continued to worsen. According to his temper, he wouldn't answer such a question, but now he unconsciously made a stupid response. It's spreading news about Wu Jun. You actually know. Nonsense, of course Horn Demon knew. Actually, it didn't matter how big of a commotion he caused in the wasteland. The manipulator behind the scenes and the Toyama Auction House had the ability to limit the negative effects to a certain range. Only spreading the news about Wu Jun and Luo Yuandao's laboratory was tantamount to smashing the auction house's pot. It made the value of a unique auction item instantly drop by half, or maybe even more. More importantly, once the news reached Luo Nan's ears and reached Xia City, it would be hard for them to pinch Luo Nan if they were to find him first. The treat plan would be in danger of being stillborn. Horn Demon knew this clearly, but he never cared. He had this kind of temperament and character. However, at this moment he began to feel weak when facing Luo Yuan's smiling face that remained grave and stern. Luo Yuan didn't give him a chance to be at a loss. He reached out and patted Horn Demon's right shoulder. His tone seemed to be sighing. A woman marrying more than one person hurts her character. She might give birth to a son without an asshole. You might not be able to live until then, so it probably doesn't matter. But right now you need to learn a lesson. At the very least, you need to let the stakeholders vent their anger. Horn Demon's pupils contracted. His body tensed up instinctively, but it was useless. He didn't even have time to react before his right arm was in severe pain. 2 of his fingers had already been torn off. Luo Yuan grabbed his arm and forcefully tore it off from his shoulder. Oh. A blood-curdling scream rang out, but under the control of Horned Demon's instinctive suppression, it turned into a roar that rolled in his throat. Horned Demon's figure fell down. His limb was torn off and he was bleeding profusely. The corresponding psychological trauma nearly made him kneel on the ground. But in the end he managed to stand up with difficulty. He just bent his waist, barely maintaining his trembling body. His mouth oozed bloody saliva and his eyes sprayed poisonous flames. He stared fixedly at the muddy shore of the lake. It was as if his mortal enemy was hidden in the ditch there. At this moment, whether it was on this side of the wasteland or the distant North Mountain Lake of Ban City, the air froze. Only Luo Yuan's hoarse voice echoed, "I hope you can accept and understand this punishment. To tell you the truth, as a former employee of the laboratory, I chose a slightly more severe method. I feel much more comfortable now." Horned Demon's body just trembled. He didn't say a word. In fact, even he was surprised that he was able to keep his mind clear, calm and restrained. He wasn't the only one who was surprised. Yinlu heard a low cry beside her and there were some words. She didn't hear it clearly due to the excessive vagueness. When she looked back, she only saw Luo Nan's lips slightly open and close. She was unable to distinguish it. But at this time, Luo Nan's lens was firmly locked onto Horned Demon's body. Luo Yuan held the severed arm that once belonged to Horned Demon in his hand. The severed limb was still twitching. He raised his eyebrows and placed the torn wound before his eyes. He sized it up seriously. "The activity of the nerve cells is much better than I imagined. The repairability isn't bad either. Look, the bleeding has stopped. Your gene modulation last time wasn't completely useless. You can do a local proliferation repair later. You'll pay the cost yourself." He threw the severed arm into the mud after saying this. "Okay, I finished dealing with this matter. Let's hurry up with the laboratory." He turned to Fatty Dragon. His unchanging smile matched with his eyes, indicating for Fatty Dragon to look up. At this time, the medium-sized transport plane that carried Luo Yuan over had already deviated from the sky above Saltwater Lake. It flew northwest. It was unknown when, but it pulled up colorful smoke in the air, afraid that others wouldn't be able to see it. Just when everyone's gazes were focused, something was thrown down from the transport plane. Of course, it wasn't a person this time. It was a beacon that pulled up colorful smoke. Chapter 765. When Luo Yuan's suggestion was implemented, the people who were still alive on the side of the saltwater lake were already in the off-road vehicle on the lakeshore, speeding towards the beacon location of the colorful smoke pillar. The atmosphere in the car was very strange. The off-road vehicle itself was Gardner's legacy. Even if the man who was suspected to be a military spy was still breathing when the true god descended, he was already dead after being sifted through 7 or 8 times in the saltwater lake. Without the original owner, the authority of the off-road vehicle almost became a problem. Fortunately, Luo Yuan carried a new generation of dynamo core that was said to be used for internal testing. In addition to being able to be implanted into the human body, this thing seemed to be a natural enemy of intelligent systems. Luo Yuan used it to hack the control system of the off-road vehicle. Although some functions involving the military's remote control authority were restricted, basic driving was not a problem. Luo Yuan also sat in the driver's seat. The front passenger seat was given to the largest fat dragon, and 3 people were squeezed in the back seat. Jingxin, who pretended to be mute, the centaur with a broken arm, and Huadian, who was lucky enough to survive. Jingxin's talkative attribute disappeared the moment the true god's will descended. He was now a good dog, obedient wherever the will of the true god descended. The centaur's state was a bit more complicated. He found the medical box from the off-road vehicle and was bandaging the broken arm. However, he looked at his hand movements. His thoughts drifted to somewhere else and his eyes were uncertain. As for Huadian, as a commercial employee, he didn't have an obvious position. When Fat Dragon and others' internal communication network was hacked and information was leaked, his first reaction was to stay away from the matter. Although he didn't run away in the end, he avoided the direct impact of the true god's wrath and survived. However, he was swept by the power of the Fusang divine tree and was inexplicably stuffed into the car. He was also listless. He wanted to pretend to be a dead dog, but he couldn't hide the nervousness in his heart. At this time, Luo Yuan used his hoarse voice to pacify the whistling dry wind. Everyone relax. Visiting Luo Yuandao's laboratory, appraising, playing some dirty tricks and doing some experiments, isn't that your goal? This goal will soon be achieved, so you should be happy. He smiled and turned his head to look at Fat Dragon's stiff face. Don't think that I'm joking. It's just that some people can't stand your torment. As an outsider, the reason why I'm here is because I've been entrusted by someone. Let's not talk about the distant matters, but at the very least I have to make sure that the Toyama auction house is all right. Speaking of which, you're considered a major shareholder. Fatty Dragon glanced over, his eyes glowing like the sun, and the pressure on the spiritual plane was as strong as a storm. However, Luo Yuan didn't care at all. The centaur can come over and everyone has already turned a blind eye to it. But with such a big movement, the auction item that was won with great difficulty may not be sold. At that time, Lord True God, I'm afraid that your Pope Father won't look too good either. Before Luo Yuan could finish his sentence, Horned Demon, Jingxin and Hua Dian, who were at the back, lowered their heads at the same time regardless of their physical or mental state. They really treated them as three dead dogs, yearning to spit out their tongues and die to prove their innocence. The relationship between the two extraordinaries, the true god of the Amaterasu cult and the Pope, as well as the story of how the Amaterasu cult started, was more or less a taboo in the inner world. The son was a true god and the father was the Pope. Such a strange configuration of the upper echelons almost confirmed the nature of the Amaterasu cult as a grassroots cult before its rise. Some things could be said in private, but it would blow up if it was said in person. Horned Demon and the others seemed to be able to hear the groan of the off-road vehicle under them on the verge of collapse. But in the end, the off-road vehicle still arrived near the beacon thrown by the transport vehicle in relatively good condition. Just as the vehicle arrived, two figures appeared on the horizon of the wasteland. The distance and direction were different, but their unhurried pace was similar. It felt like they were calmer than the group of people who came by car. Anthony and Vanta. They've been nearby for a long time. The will of the true god in Fatty Dragon's body made a direct judgment. Everyone who comes is a guest. Don't you also wish for more visitors? Luo Yuan waved at the two in a friendly manner, then jumped out of the car. The light in Fatty Dragon's eyes swept over the two people. The aura on Anthony's body flowed sluggishly like liquid mercury. It was obvious that he had endured a power that far exceeded the limits of his body and soul structure. This was what it looked like when Immortal used divine methods. As for Vanta, from the true god's point of view, Vanta's consciousness was completely sealed in the fortress built of a physical body. Apart from some fluctuations that radiated, there were no other traces. Even with the power of the Fusang divine tree system, it was impossible to determine the truth in a short period of time. However, this action at the level of an ability user was probably equivalent to an ordinary person blocking their mouth and nose to hold their breath, but he could actually hold it. He was quite a strange fellow. At this moment, Luo Yuan clapped his hands to attract everyone's attention. It was almost exactly the same as what Horned Demon had done a few hours ago. Jingxin subconsciously glanced at Horned Demon, but the latter was in a daze and did not seem to notice. I know that everyone is here for Luo Yuandao's laboratory. Now that everyone has been gathered here, I want to save some time in the negative impact it will bring. To put it simply, if there's anything, go to the laboratory to solve it. Don't mess around outside. The people who came with the off-road vehicle already knew the ins and outs of the matter. Anthony and Vanta could not hide their puzzlement. They did not know why Luo Yuan jumped out. Luo Yuan did not explain further. He quickly cut to the point. Due to the characteristics of the laboratory entrance's irregular movement, almost no one can lock onto the area where the entrance is located over a long period of time. Except for Wu Jun. The few people from the Amaterasu parish added in their hearts. However, Horned Demon had some luck. Of course, there is also the surprising greed of a certain parish. He locked onto this relatively narrow area with relative accuracy. In this way, for a former laboratory employee like me, finding the entrance is more or less up to the task. The smile on Luo Yuan's face seemed to become deeper. When we were maintaining the anchoring device back then, we often used this matter as a bet. Of course, we must first eliminate senior sister Qingwen. Otherwise there is no way to play. Come on, the top auction item worth 100 billion, the future hot research base, and of course, The Holy Land for Writing Papers Format 70 Research Institute. Welcome everyone. Following his voice, a mechanical squeaking sound came from the ground under everyone's feet. At Luo Yuan's feet, a part of the red soil sank, revealing a rather deep hole. Chapter 766. There were no natural anomalies, nor were there any lighting effects. It was just a bare cave with a series of creaking sounds on the uneven red soil. There was a flight of stairs at the bottom. This setup was barely passable as the entrance to a secret laboratory in the wilderness, but it was far from what everyone had been imagining and trying to figure out for a period of time. There's no need to be suspicious. Here. Everyone just come to the front. The 7 people present gathered together. The participants of the transaction in front of this door maintained their original state of mind. Most of them maintained an intense and urgent interest in the laboratory. However, they were more or less stunned when they saw this scene. This is Bo Qingwen's design. It is said that the structure of the door is based on solid rock. There are requirements for the environmental structure, so no matter where it is moved, it must touch the ground. This design is quite basic. It doesn't rely on instruments to complete it. Therefore, the people from the Toyama auction house couldn't do anything about it when they dismantled the anchoring device. Of course, in order to avoid moving it into the water, opening it at the bottom of the lake and causing water to flow in, the anchoring device was designed to avoid danger. Fortunately, the saltwater lake you guys are in doesn't have this thing. Otherwise, you would have to struggle with the water first. Fatty Dragon occupied the largest area in front of the cave. The will of the true god attached to Fatty Dragon scanned the ordinary door on the ground a few dozen times. It muttered to itself for a moment before turning its gaze to the Horned Demon. Among everyone present, only the Horned Demon had truly been to Luo Yuandao's laboratory, aside from Luo Yuan. Of course he could provide proof. The Horned Demon's consciousness entered a half-dazed state. He didn't even pay much attention to the true god's gaze. Instead he slowly bent his knees and half knelt on the ground. He used his only left hand to dig at the red earth at the edge of the cave. Not only did he dig out the red earth granules, but he also dug out the rock fragments below. Then he stuffed it into his mouth, chewed and tasted it. Only now did he speak vaguely to Fatty Dragon. Every time I see it, I feel that it's inconceivable. This taste. This fellow really is a madman. Yin Lu evaluated in a low voice on the yacht on Beishan Lake. She turned her head as she spoke, wanting to find some sense of approval with Luo Nan. But at this moment she saw the youth beside her squint his eyes. His lips and tongue were slightly licking and biting. There was clearly nothing there, but it seemed like he was tasting some special dish. Yin Lu was horrified. That was tasting dirt. Aside from the fact that there was no sand in his mouth, all of Luo Nan's facial expressions and movements were nearly 100% synchronized with the Horned Demon that was over 3,000 kilometers away. Oh, there was also a sparkling luster at the corner of her eyes. Yin Lu was at a complete loss for a time when faced with Luo Nan's bizarre state. He wanted to break the ice, but he didn't have the courage to do so. His entire body froze in place. After a few seconds, the young man beside him let out a sigh of relief and removed the strange state on his own. No wonder I couldn't find it. I've overlooked too many structural details. It turns out that it's been reassembled and connected. I've been too naive. First, sir? It's okay. One of my doubts has been resolved and I've found some very good teaching materials. Luo Nan turned his face to reveal an extraordinarily brilliant smile. With that said, he erased the useless configuration blueprints and compared them to the current location of Luo Yuan and the others. He reconstructed the terrain and the door that had just opened. Previously, Luo Nan didn't understand why he could use himself as the starting point to set up the large coordinate system. He had a deep perception of the curvature of spacetime and its structure. He was able to capture the intersection point between planes like the cloud world and the deep blue world and the local spacetime. He just couldn't find any traces of his grandfather's laboratory in this wasteland. Now, with his mother's work, he had reconstructed the spacetime interference structure. Everything became a matter of course. Luo Nan liked this answer very much. He liked it very much. Luo Nan's state became even more relaxed under his great mood. Even though he was using his heart to reproduce the relevant configuration blueprints, he still remembered to give Yin Lu a reminder. I'm not clear about the specific environment of the laboratory. For the sake of caution, the view will be narrower. I basically don't need to filter anything anymore. Huh? Before Yinlu could understand what was going on, the group of people in the wasteland followed Luo Yuan's lead. They followed the stairs down the cave and entered one by one. Yinlu looked from Luo Yuan to Jingxin, who entered last. There was no one left at the cave entrance, but the corresponding lens didn't change from beginning to end. Just as she was puzzled, the lens finally changed. The change was very abrupt. The light suddenly dimmed and the space felt cramped. When it became clear again, all she saw was a wall of flesh in front of her. It was Fatty Dragon, the carrier of a true god's soul possession. How could it be so close? And this perspective, Yin Li's heart raced. Her mind quickly recalled the sequence of people entering the laboratory one after another. The first was Luo Yuan. The second was Fatty Dragon. The third was the Horn Demon. That's right. According to the sequence, the Horn Demon went down right next to Fatty Dragon. This position and height were very close. Thinking back to the synchronized reactions of Luo Nan and the Horn Demon, Yinlu finally connected the logical chain. This was also a soul possession. How did Luo Nan do it? While she was in a trance, the group of people had already passed through the underground passage and entered a relatively spacious area. According to Luo Yuan, this was the most spacious place in the entire laboratory. People adjusted their positions here and looked around. Luo Yuan continued to introduce. The structure of the laboratory is very simple. Actually, apart from a very small number of people, experiments can't be done here. It's more like an observation point. Right now, all the facilities and equipment here have been moved away. Even the observation itself has become a problem. But I think this shouldn't be a problem for everyone here. The Horn Demon. It was unknown whether or not the Horn Demon was completely under Luo Nan's control, but it turned its head to observe. Yinlu was able to confirm that they were in a semicircular space. It was completely empty. All that was left were the messy instrument tables and some of the severed wires. The demolition work of the Toyama auction house was done very well. Right now, the only eye-catching thing here was the curved surface in front of them. It was similar to the arrangement of a ship's porthole. The curved surface was a whole piece of transparent interface. At the very least, it should have been transparent at first. It was just that it was gray and dirty, completely obscuring one's vision. Even if it wasn't obscured, one could still see it in this underground space. Oh, was it a misconception? Why did she feel that there really seemed to be a depth behind the gray and dirty mirror surface in front of her? Moreover, it was shaking and swaying violently. It was like a sandstorm between the portholes, covering the entire area of vision. This was because the sandstorm was airtight. It was like a thick rock layer that completely buried the porthole interface. Was this an underground sandstorm? What was this? Chapter 767. The observation point that Luo Yuan mentioned wasn't big. With Fat Dragon's massive physique, it only took 2 steps to arrive behind the circular observation window. Following that, he reached out his hand and touched the inner layer of the window. He was also sensing the details of the collision between the window and the sandstorm outside. A great spectacle. The will of the true god whose soul was attached to Fat Dragon described it this way. He rarely used the word great, but at this moment, it wasn't easy to find a word that was more in line with reality and his state of mind. Lord True God should have seen it before. Horned Demon once visited this place. Back then it was a better observation opportunity. He's not a good carrier. Under the propping mulberry trees system, the meaning of this sentence was equivalent to he's not a good believer. On the other side, Jingxin's heart instinctively twitched when he heard this. He subconsciously lowered his head, afraid that the true god would comment on him. However, as the person in question, Horned Demon only stared intently at the observation window. He looked at the thick sandstorm outside with amazement at his level of concentration. The true god's attention was still focused on the sandstorm outside the observation window, so he didn't care about Horned Demon's reaction. He used Fat Dragon's thick fingers to slowly rub against the windshield, feeling the details of the collision between the inside and the outside. At the same time, he said in an especially gentle tone, "Those sand-like fragments have spatial textures. Those sand-like fragments have the texture of space. We don't necessarily understand what space is, but we give it this definition. At the very least, it's an approximation. It makes people feel that if these fragments are pieced together, they will form an additional dimension that can accommodate us." Luo Yuan clapped, as expected of Lord True God. "You sound like you're preaching." I'm just deliberately mystifying things. If I really knew the truth behind it, why would I need to say so much nonsense? The true god's attitude was very frank. In front of the mystery that seemed to be within reach, his reputation wasn't that important. He continued to rub the window. It was shaped like a windshield and it did block the sandstorm outside. However, behind the seemingly simple phenomenon, there was a deep and complicated mechanism. If it's just an ordinary windshield including this laboratory, and if it's just an ordinary underground building, then nothing will be left behind under the erosion of the sandstorm outside. Such craftsmanship is rare in the world, right? In fact, it's unique. Luo Yuan also walked to the observation window and stood side by side with Fatty Dragon. Ignoring the difference in size, the two people's auras were equally matched. He calmly explained, Luo Yuan Dao and his son along with Bo Qingwen, they slowly constructed this laboratory in the sandstorm that we are currently witnessing. They continuously pushed deeper into the sandstorm. In fact, the main task of constructing and pushing forward was all done by Bo Qingwen. In this field, her talent was displayed without restraint, especially in the middle and late stages. She made progress almost every day, and every 2 or 3 weeks she would have a new discovery. Luo Yuandao, on the other hand, shifted his research field to the practical application of formatting theory. Luo Zhongheng was the most active experimental subject. He could always digest the new results of Luo Yuandao and Bo Qingwen. At that time, everything seemed to be going well until one day an unforeseen event occurred and the process was interrupted. Weight structure? What are they using? Materials? Technology? The true god grasped a key word. About that. Luo Yuan stomped his feet, letting everyone present feel the physical nature of the laboratory. The place we are in seems to be the product of hollowing out the rock strata. In the first 2 years that I came here, I always thought that it was like this. But in fact, this place is pieced together using building blocks. Oh, the true god also said this word. It's really amazing. As for the raw materials, it is said to be those. Luo Yuan pointed outside the observation window. There was only one thing there, and that was the sandstorm that was so dense that it could no longer be distinguished from the static state. Every fragment is a building block with a specific shape and nature. Although we don't know why they are broken and how they are restored with such rich materials, it is still possible to pick apart from them and redesign a small room in your heart. These are Bo Qingwen's original words. Fatty Dragon turned his head and stared blankly at the silent roaring sandstorm outside the window. The others were similar. After knowing the premise, the originally cramped laboratory gave people a completely different feeling. Even if they were here in person, it was hard for them to imagine how Bo Qingwen had pieced together the sand and dust into a building of this scale using the method of building blocks. After so many years, I have returned to the old place. I am also very surprised that it can still maintain its general appearance. Luo Yuan smiled and looked up. No one knew what he was looking at. At the end of his line of sight, there was nothing but the ceiling. Bo Qingwen. Fatty Dragon said this name, which was equivalent to the will of the true god giving extra attention. It sounds like an excellent woman. Why isn't she famous? If even the true god can't really understand her genius and technology, how can you count on those ordinary people? Of course, she is also an excellent architect. Even in the wilderness, her light will shine sooner or later. However, the bad luck of the Luo family infected her, and of course that bastard. At this moment, no one could see Luo Yuan's expression, but even the true god attached to Fatty Dragon could not continue the conversation for a while. In the end, Luo Yuan turned his face again, still with the same smiling expression. Okay, let's not talk about unpleasant things. Everyone has paid a great price to get the opportunity to visit, study, and inspect the goods. I hope that you won't cause trouble or even lose your life because of some low-level mistakes, at least in the eyes of former employees like me. So, please allow me to talk about some taboos in the laboratory. At this point, Luo Yuan turned his head to look at the centaur and asked, You are also a person who has been tossing around here. Have you told everyone? The centaur glanced at him and ignored him. Luo Yuan was not angry. Then I'll explain it from the beginning. It's not particularly complicated. There are only 3 basic principles. First, I believe that you all know very well that the sandstorm outside the observation window is not a real sandstorm. Any contact with it that you think is infallible will lead to fatal consequences. Second, don't leave the scope of space you can understand. I mean, this laboratory is your shelter. Only here can you observe the sandstorm more leisurely, and at the same time, you don't have to worry about your own survival. Well, we have been bored here for too long. We might as well go to other areas of the laboratory to recognize the way and identify the safe zone. Luo Yuan left the observation point first, leading a group of people through the corridor of the laboratory, introducing the rooms on both sides. The main structure of the laboratory is like a crab, with a wide and hard carapace and two pairs of strong chelicerae stretching out. Its upper body is protruding forward, exposed to the sandstorm, and the back is still attached to the space we are familiar with. Basically, the head and chelicerae are very strong. At least when I am here, I can listen to the sandstorm and the special interference sound of the laboratory and have a good dream. You have seen the laboratory. The circular corridor we are walking in is the chelicerae on one side. We call it the left chelicerae corridor, and the symmetrical side is naturally the right chelicerae corridor. Note that they look like a ring, but they are not connected. There is a room at the end, and if you want to die, you can go in. Here we are. In front of the place where Luo Yuan stopped, there was a seemingly very thick metal door, equipped with a turntable lock similar to that of a traditional vault, highlighting the cautious mentality of the designer. Well, this set of safety doors was installed after Bo Qingwen's death, because without her the follow-up project was aborted. Before this was actually a place to show off their affection. Luo Yuan's words became strange and he had no intention of opening the door. However, with the sensing ability of a true god, a mere metal door could not stop him. After a little sensing, he understood. Indeed, the space-time structure is very unstable and it was basically eroded and destroyed by this sandstorm. This door is actually meaningless and it mainly relies on a splicing structure similar to the observation point. Is the other side of the corridor the same configuration? Yes, originally Bo Qingwen wanted to make a vehicle that could move freely in the sandstorm, and called it the tree hole plan. At the end of the two corridors is actually the vehicle parking station. She and Luo Zhongheng each presided over one, and they started work at the same time to compare with each other. But in the end, only a small part of the work was completed and misfortune came. Luo Yuan turned back. The observation center, the left and right corridors, and the rooms on both sides are basically the scope of the safe zone. At least it was very safe before. After dismantling so many pieces of equipment, there must be some holes, right? Luo Yuan walked with a smile and suddenly reached out and opened the door of a room on the side. Strangely, in this enclosed underground space, there was a slight airflow passing through, brushing past people's faces. The breeze blew out from the empty room and correspondingly, there was inexplicably distorted light. Nice watch, lend it to me. Luo Yuan politely took a valuable watch from Detective Hua Dian, and then threw it into the room. Under the distorted light, the watch disappeared without a trace. Sure enough, the work of the Toyama auction house is quite rough. It is said that in this room, when two people were dismantling, they played with time travel. One person safely returned to the ground, but his spine was twisted, and the other person has not been found until now. Hua Dian felt his wrist was sore and painful and he subconsciously took half a step back. Luo Yuan closed the door. Well, the third rule: everyone must pray devoutly at all times. Due to the lack of anchoring equipment, there may be similar rooms and areas appearing. When that time comes, everyone can only rely on luck and hope that they don't travel into the sandstorm. Of course, if you can find a large fragment there that can accommodate you and survive, then you will be a lucky person who only appears once in a few decades. That's it. Most people had complicated expressions on their faces. Luck, that's not a good word. Fat Dragon followed the will of the true god and slowly said, but this is the value of Luo Yundao's laboratory. The endless dust and debris outside is the greatest treasure. But if you don't master the skill to reassemble the fragments, you can only rely on luck. That's basically it. So you guys made that plan to treat us to a meal to let the only child in the world who has materialized formatting theory and proposed configuration theory help you solve the problem of luck. Luo Yuan was still smiling. Don't blame me for being picky, true god. First of all, formatting theory isn't some lost secret manual. You can give me a few of your church's believers now, and I can let you see the results in a month. Of course, after a period of time, I can't guarantee how many people will survive. Secondly, configuration theory isn't the patent of that child. The Apocalypse Laboratory and the Deep Blue Laboratory have even more mature industrialized technology, but they are biased towards physical products and are not related to the high-end needs of the laboratory that involves the structure of space and time. In fact, there is no evidence that the child has this kind of ability. The theoretical technology he has displayed is still limited to the spiritual side or the soul. It's just that the person who proposed the plan and I, the consultant, are all loyal supporters of the bloodline theory. So many people want to see if the kid who inherited Bo Qingwen's bloodline has talent in this area. At the end of the day, this is more like a prayer ceremony before trying your luck. At least that's what I understand. Driven by the true God's will, Fat Dragon's chest shook and he laughed softly. At this moment, someone in the crowd suddenly raised his hand. The one who did this was the centaur. He raised his only left hand and attracted everyone's attention. Under the gazes of the two groups of extraordinaries, he spoke in a hoarse voice. Mr. Luo Yuan, according to my understanding, you should be the luckiest of all the laboratory employees. As you said, you don't have the corresponding splicing technology, then you were even luckier to find a fragment with an astonishing volume? How did you move it and use it? Or is it still here in the depths of this sandstorm? The already narrow left pincer corridor seemed to be about to explode from the centaur's wanton disclosure. Those who knew and those who didn't subconsciously held their breaths as their brains worked quickly. They wanted to see how Luo Yuan would answer and react. The true god who possessed Fat Dragon could have stopped the centaur with a shout, but he didn't. Luo Yuan stared at the centaur and the smile on his face that revealed the muscles on his cheeks deepened. But in the end he said in an extremely calm tone, "That's a private deal between me and the goddess of destiny. It's not suitable to say it face to face." A hoarse laugh came from the centaur's throat. He didn't continue to ask and just made an evaluation. Chapter 768. Not good. Yin Lu felt that the situation was far from good when the centaur suddenly opened his mouth in the laboratory. She couldn't tell whether the centaur or Luo Nan was speaking from the centaur's perspective. Yin Lu was almost certain that Luo Nan's emotions had already seeped into the centaur's body 3,000 kilometers away. Fortunately, due to the centaur's usual crazy behavior and the corresponding underlying mechanism was hard to imagine, neither Luo Yuan nor the true god who possessed the Fat Dragon suspected anything. But they didn't need to suspect anything. Luo Nan was about to explode. His face was a mix of green and red, especially when Luo Yuan recklessly evaluated Luo Yuan Dao, Luo Nan and Bo Qingwen. When Luo Yuan spat out the word vile spawn, the storm above the abyss was wrapped in thunder and lightning. It buzzed in the deep sky. Even the Blood Soul Temple that Yin Lu relied on seemed to groan and sway in the thunderstorm. What would she do if she made a move? What would she do if she leaked her tracks? Yin Li's mind churned with jumbled thoughts, but she couldn't find a way to dissuade him. It was hard to form an effective response. The setting sun above North Mountain Lake shone down. It was warm, but Yin Lu already felt the chill of the night ahead of time. She didn't care to look at the centaur's reaction in the distance. She just stared at Luo Nan and prayed in her heart at the same time. But her mind was in chaos as to what she should pray to and who she should pray to. That bitch. Luo Nan suddenly repeated the words that had just echoed in the laboratory. This made Yin Lu even more certain that the centaur's words and actions were influenced by Luo Nan's interference. She actually didn't quite understand who the so-called bitch was, but Luo Nan being able to open up a channel of communication was already a joyous matter. She hurriedly continued, "You're saying, the goddess of fate. That bitch." Luo Nan rarely used vulgarities, but he was speaking more and more naturally now. And he couldn't stop once he opened his mouth. He continued on without end, "She can flirt with countless people at the same time. Then she can randomly choose a lucky person and let that person enjoy everything alone. She can let others bear the rest of the misfortune. Flirt. Ha, flirting with that bitch, I really believed her nonsense." Yin Lu opened her mouth but she was actually speechless. It wasn't that Luo Nan's eloquence was overflowing. Rather, she had already been defeated by Luo Nan's chaotic logic and his corresponding intense emotions. Luo Nan's arms swept across the virtual work area, causing the graphics on the surface to fluctuate and tremble. They were practically unrecognizable. This was undoubtedly an emotional action. It was probably because the psychic diagram reminded him of the so-called flirting theory in the past, and he was seriously displeased. Yin Lu didn't dare to advise him. She was afraid that she would say something that would provoke Luo Nan. Luo Nan would immediately start a war with the two extraordinaries in the laboratory. Right when she was at a complete loss, she saw Luo Nan's movements suddenly come to a halt. He forgot to retract the arm he had waved. He only used his eyes to stare fixedly at the work area. He stared at the turbulent light and shadow that had yet to completely recover. Yinlu turned her gaze as well, but there was nothing within the faint glow of the work area. Aside from the psychic diagram and the structural design diagram that had just recovered from the distortions and turbulences, there was nothing else. She was unable to see any special changes. On the contrary, Luo Nan's aura was constantly changing. That fluctuating aura was like the roaring and churning sea on the psychic diagram. There seemed to be some sort of resonance between the two. There it is. Yinlu chased after Luo Nan's line of sight. She stared at a certain area on the psychic diagram. Actually, she still didn't quite understand, but Luo Nan's deep whisper rang out at the same time, giving her a simple explanation. There's a change. Luo Nan extended his hand. His fingertips touched the scene of the clouds surging above the psychic diagram. He slowly drew his hand over. He only thought of something halfway through and activated the drawing function. He scribbled a few times on this area and then he drew a few strokes. Then he stopped and sized it up in detail. Actually, the overall structure of the lines and shadows of the psychic diagram hadn't changed too much. But when Luo Nan raised his hand again, Yinlu felt that the electric arcs leaping between the clouds and shuttling between the sea tornadoes seemed to be much denser. Correspondingly, the scene of the storm on the psychic diagram gave people an increasingly unbridled and wild feeling. After looking at it for a long time, it was as if the entire scene was cut from the actual scene of the sea and the sky. It pounced directly into the depths of the eyes. This diagram? Yinlu didn't know how to describe it for a time. Luo Nan's response was exceptionally fleeting. They can indeed form a connection. The goddess of destiny might be a bitch, but she's always been exceptionally lenient towards the strong. Although this proves that she's a bitch even more. Luo Nan's incoherent words made Yinlu even more worried. Luo Nan wasn't angry at this moment. It was as if he had been infected by the deranged horned demon. Luo Nan suddenly turned his head while his thoughts were running wild. He bared his teeth at her and laughed. Oh, I've been infected by that horned demon. Yinli's hair stood on end. Luo Nan's smile and words were simply a conversation with her soul. Right now she was in front of Luo Nan's eyes. Her entire body was glowing red. It was hard to conceal anything. And then there was this tone and style. Luo Nan's eyes were a bit absent-minded, but his mouth was extremely polite. Sorry, I didn't want to scare you. If I didn't do this, I wouldn't have been able to utilize that fellow's special sensory ability. He really is a lunatic and a freak. Yinlu didn't know what was going to happen next. The logic of a lunatic was simply impossible to understand and predict. Even in front of Luo Nan, who seemed to be able to see through her soul, she still had this thought. Otherwise she would have been driven insane. Right when Yinlu was in a state of fear, the turbulent atmosphere in Luo Yuandao's laboratory over 3,000 kilometers away gradually calmed down. People were already used to Horn's deranged behavior. In addition to the magnanimity of the two extraordinaries, the group of people acted as if nothing had happened. They continued to familiarize themselves with the laboratory's environment under Luo Yuan's guidance. They searched for places of interest and value. They also verified whether or not the auction items and corresponding prices were appropriate. Everyone had a ruler in their hearts. They all had their own standards, so they slowly spread out and acted on their own. Luo Yuan didn't mind. He led the group around the laboratory and considered his mission accomplished. He stayed at the observation point and chatted with the will of the true god, who also stayed there. Jingxin, a subordinate follower of the Amaterasu cult, stayed by his side. He was trembling with fear and filled with jealousy. He was jealous that the other follower in name, the Horned Demon, could leave so boldly. Was this preferential treatment for a lunatic? The Horned Demon didn't care what other people thought. He directly turned to the right claw corridor where he had spent less time before. He walked all the way to the end of the corridor and as expected he saw a metal door that looked like a vault. He was not alone. Detective Hua Dian had the same ambition as him. The latter was only half a minute later than him. When she saw the centaur's back, she hesitated for a moment before leaning over to greet him. she started a conversation as if she was chatting. "Brother Horned Demon, are you interested in this place?" If Mr. Luo Yuan's tree hole project was completed, the value of this laboratory would increase tenfold. What a pity. Yes, it's a pity. The Horned Demon's answer was perfunctory. However, he still paid extraordinary attention to the room behind the metal door that was bound to be destroyed. Even a blind person could see it. Hua Dian followed the Horned Demon's focus and tried to obtain more valuable information from this lunatic who had entered the palace twice. "I really want to open this door and take a look. Hey. When she saw the Horned Demon's actions, Hua Dian felt like her hair was about to explode. She instantly retreated 7 to 8 meters, almost to the other end of the circular corridor. The Horned Demon's hand was already turning the wheel, but he didn't open the door. Perhaps he didn't know the password. He finally placed his hand on the wheel and asked a question that seemed rather idiotic. "Why is it called the Tree Hole Project? What's the criteria for the name?" Hua Dian wanted to say something like, "I have nothing to say to a lunatic like you. Please stay away from me." However, the habit of commercial espionage allowed him to continue the conversation as much as possible and deepen the communication. Brother Horned Demon should have also detected the environment behind the door. If the other side hasn't changed beyond recognition, isn't its structure just a long and narrow tree hole? Of course, if it's flat, it's a long shuttle. Then why not just call it a shuttle? Or rocket? Hua Dian indicated that this conversation with a low IQ and high insanity attribute couldn't be continued. The Horned Demon didn't care if he didn't get an answer from Hua Dian. Or rather, from the beginning, the Horned Demon and the will in the depths of his heart didn't expect to get an answer from anyone. He just took this opportunity to observe, think and judge. Now that he had a corresponding result, the Horned Demon slammed the wheel hard. He turned around and strode away amidst the rumbling sound of the metal door. A layer of cold sweat had already accumulated on Hua Dian's back. He didn't want to have anything to do with this lunatic. He raised his hand to let the Horned Demon go, sending him off with his eyes. Luo Nan suddenly stood up on the Ray yacht on North Mountain Lake. He issued an order under Yin Li's blank gaze. "Prepare the teleportation array. I want to return to Xia City. Now." Yin Lu shivered and quickly stood up to respond, "Anytime, mister. I've already arranged for people to rearrange the materials during the day, but for safety reasons I'll have to ask you to do another test. I'll have the yacht go over right now." "No need. I'm fine by myself." Luo Nan walked to the edge of the sundeck and kicked the heavy metal case that was placed there. The mechanical components immediately activated and adjusted their positions. The case's lid opened and Luo Nan stood in the 2 shallow grooves that accommodated his feet. His body fell down slightly and then he was lifted up by the body. Thousands of metal components corresponded to each other under the control of the AI. They revolved around Luo Nan's body and combined in many ways. They formed an exoskeleton armor that enveloped Luo Nan's entire body within 5 seconds. There are still some supplementary materials at Point B. I'm going there. Then I'll turn back to Xia City. You keep watch over the teleportation array. I should be back soon. What did he want to do? Chapter 769. Luo Nan relied on the spatial resonance connection between the transmission array and gear of the North Bank to construct a transit channel through the cloud world. He traveled through the void and returned to the main laboratory area of gear of the North Bank's underground 6th floor. Aside from the problem of energy consumption during resonance and jumps, as well as the wear and tear of the devices that carried the energy, everything was perfect. Successive experiments and practices conducted in Ban City and Spring City proved the reliability of this method. Such elusive methods were no longer enough to excite Luo Nan. His face buried behind the metal visor was without the slightest ripple. He just closed his eyes and adapted a bit to the slight discomfort caused by the long-distance spatial travel. The military-grade AI, Standard Bearer, automatically turned on the illumination power of the laboratory area when it sensed Luo Nan's return. It sent over some of the work progress of the AI's recent analysis. A continuous stream of information notifications rang out. The virtual screen on Luo Nan's retina kept popping up with titles and keywords. He wasn't in the mood to look at these right now. He ignored all of them. Speaking of which, Luo Nan hadn't been here for 3 or 4 days. The reason he gave to the outside world was to clean up the corresponding experimental equipment and make preparations to leave school. This reason was really weak. Whether it was the Xia City branch or the relevant personnel of the Mystic Arts Research Society, no one would believe it. But it didn't matter. No one would expose him. However, he received a few messages the moment he reconnected to the psychic wave network. Most of them came from He Yuan and Bro Octopus. The others were fine, but the last message he received made Luo Nan's attention focus a bit. It was an electronic invitation. The interface design was quite exquisite. Seemed to be of a very high level. Looking at the signature on the interface, it came from the Fushan auction house. It was a completely logical and provocative target. To Mr. Luo Nan read the opening and his face behind the visor finally formed a cold arc. His gaze flickered as he ignored the meaningless, hypocritical and polite words. He captured the most crucial information. The Jadeite Light. May 6th. Set sail from Ban City. High Seas Auction. May 16th. Special auction of the Jadeite Light. Relying on the electronic invitation, people could board the ultra-luxurious cruise ship, the Jadeite Light, on May 6th. They would travel by sea for 10 days and participate in the top-notch auction. Of course, guests who felt that time was precious could also take a private plane and arrive on the same day. The electronic invitation even had a list of auction items and a corresponding introduction. The name Luo Yuandao Laboratory Coordinates and Supporting Equipment was impressively listed. At first glance, it looked a bit crude compared to the other magnificent works of art. But in Luo Yuandao Laboratory Coordinates, it was the value of all the other auction items added together. Yes, the value referred to the value of the laboratory itself. Luo Yuandao had to. If the Fushan auction house and the designer of the treat plan still believed that Luo Nan would be grasped by this sort of thing, then they would only be disappointed. Luo Nan had already found his grandfather's laboratory. He had used inconceivable methods to experience and feel the various mysteries within for himself. The laboratory coordinates held practically no meaning to Luo Nan. Bank Luo Laboratory of Luo Coordinates of the Laboratory of Coordinates of Laboratory of the Laboratory of Luo of Institute of Laboratory of the Institute of the Laboratory of the Luo Laboratory of Luo of Luo Nan immediately switched the interface. He would leave the invitation letter there for now. The premise for him to accept the invitation was to continue to feign civility with that whore, the goddess of fate. And in order to confirm this premise, he needed to do the corresponding verification. This was the reason why he rushed back from Ban City. Rui Wen. Luo Nan called out softly. Though the sound waves were unable to transmit to his home, which was several dozen kilometers away, the psychic waves were able to reach far and wide. Rui Wen was doing her homework in her room. Her figure blurred and disappeared the moment she heard the call. She leaped into deep space. Luo Nan and Rui Wen cooperated flawlessly. They integrated the special configuration of gear of the North Bank to open a new spatial passageway. It just so happened to intersect with Rui Wen's shuttle trajectory. Then they left the local spacetime together to cut into the cloud world. The transmission array erected above North Mountain Lake of Ban City actually had this function as well. But the scale and degree of rigor were far inferior to gear of the North Bank. Needless to say, there were unexpected risks from wear and tear. The fact that Luo Nan was able to consider this proved that his mind was quite calm. He was unexpectedly calm. The high-altitude air currents and surging clouds of the cloud world came head-on. They seemed monotonous, but they brought along a wealth of information about this world. However, Luo Nan was completely uninterested in these superficial things right now. He just spoke softly to Rui Wen beside him. "Let's go to our ambush." Rui Wen was able to sense Luo Nan's mood. She didn't say much. She immediately entered the special state of body and soul merging. In this state, she linked and resonated with the complex and chaotic multi-layered structure of the void. Then she cut open the scene of mist on the surface of the cloud world, revealing an entrance that led to the deeper layers of the labyrinth world. This exposed the gray, turbid and chaotic maze of mist within. It was as if an ugly wound had been torn open in the cloud world. But this wound was rapidly healing. Luo Nan knew that time was of the essence. He quickly adjusted his breath and once again confirmed that the self-examination of the exoskeleton armor was normal. Then he dove headfirst inside. When he dove into the gray and gloomy turbid mist, the crack in the void closed up and was completely sealed. The corresponding light that came from the outside world also completely disappeared. Luonan no longer had anything to rely on. The only thing he could rely on was himself. The terrifying pressure within the mist labyrinth assaulted him at the same time. The configuration fragments numbered in the trillions and trillions of them formed a torrent of information that oppressed the mental plane. And the collapsing and shattering structure of the void itself created a destructive force that could crush and tear everything to shreds. It wanted to grind all things from source and non-source into dust and even into nothingness. Luonan very rarely entered this dangerous plane with his fleshly body. In fact, if he had entered with his fleshly body for the first time, there was a high probability that his body would have been smashed to pieces by now. Even now, Luonan faced such terrible environmental conditions. It was the same as playing a balancing game on the jagged edge of a meat grinder. The so-called balancing was the speed at which he pieced together the configuration fragments. It was the dynamic change between the destructive impact and interference of the powerful pressure in the surroundings. Luonan stood at the very center of the gray and white space. This place was like the simple and crude initial environment before the start of a virtual reality game. It was also like a rough house that didn't have any decorations at all. One could even see the texture of bricks and concrete that weren't all that exquisite. The radius of the space was roughly 30 meters or so. It was 10 times greater than the initial radius of 3 meters he sensed in the mist labyrinth. Of course, if one were to calculate the volume of the space, then it would be an expansion of over 3,000 times. If placed in the real world, it would be equivalent to a medium-sized shopping mall. Even if Luonan used reinforced concrete to construct this space, it would still be a rather large project. Moreover, Luonan used even more precise and complex methods. He used a jigsaw puzzle, a building block method. Luonan viewed the boundless and endless configuration fragments as raw materials. He pondered over the laws and rules that were completely different from the ordinary nature of matter. According to the nature of each fragment and particle, as well as his understanding of the configuration system, he pieced together these tiny, bizarre powder fragments that didn't even possess a physical body. He gradually strengthened their hardness and support, allowing them to grow little by little under the destructive pressure, gradually expanding their range. Luonan went from slow to fast, from sluggish to smooth, from bewilderment to clarity over the course of 4 months. Finally, he constructed a foundation that he could live on. At the same time, it was a unique domain that allowed his own abilities to be put into practice. This method was very familiar, right? That's right. It was exactly the same construction method that Luo Yuan spoke about in the laboratory that belonged exclusively to Bo Qingwen. It was of the same origin. A son learning from a stepmother. This was a matter worthy of celebration, but it was also a reasonable matter. Luonan accepted the theory of the virtual brain system of the external neuron. He also received his mother's research papers and notes from Professor Pan. This was the most logical development. It was also the most comfortable karmic cycle. In this aspect, the goddess of fate wasn't too much of a bitch. Luonan hadn't flipped the table on the spot before. A large part of this factor was a buffer. Right now, Luonan wanted to start from this embryonic domain space. He wanted to verify whether or not there was a deeper, closer connection between this domain space and the laboratory that was built in the same way. Not just in terms of construction theory and method, but also on a more complex, more realistic level. The chance to prove that you aren't such a bitch has come. Luonan spoke to the goddess of fate. If there really was such a god in the unseen world, then it's the same dust-filled sandstorm. It's the same embodiment of the collapse of space-time. It's the same inventor, researcher, and theoretical source. Such a spectacle. Such elements. Could there be a second group on Earth or even in the surrounding regions? If there's such a clumsy and absurd coincidence, then you really are hopelessly bitchy. The goddess of fate didn't admit it. She didn't deny it either. Instead, she adopted her usual ambiguous posture. The powerful pressure of the dust-filled sandstorm suddenly intensified. At the same time, bluish-white electricity leaped up from the exoskeleton armor Luonan wore. The corresponding electromagnetic muscle structure warped and swelled. It connected with the vibrations transmitted from the powerful pressure in the surroundings. It collided with the vibrations transmitted from the powerful pressure in the surroundings. There were even more complex resonances and interference. A portion of the space outside Luonan's body warped and rippled amidst the crackling noise. There was a tendency to disintegrate once more. Luonan didn't even blink his eyes at this. Hey, there's an error in pure calculations. The ambush circle underestimated the physical laws of the electromagnetic configuration. Fine adjustments are certain. The problem is, even an idiot can guess it. Don't you find it disgusting to use it to tease me? Of course, the goddess of fate wouldn't respond. Luonan didn't count on it. In any case, the agitated emotional pressure that had accumulated in Luonan's heart was clearly alleviated amidst this treacherous conversation. Luonan was no longer anxious to obtain an answer. He just slightly adjusted his floating posture. He adopted a fist stance according to Gym Master Xiu's teachings. He hooked his hand at the distorted and rippling nothingness.